Okay, I've got 10 minutes to talk to you about sustainability, which is an impossible task. So I'm going to get you to do some hard work. If you're still eating your sandwiches from lunch, you might get sticky keyboards here. And I'll start off with defining what the word sustainability does or doesn't mean. Brundtland was a Norwegian politician. I think she was, in fact, the Norwegian prime minister at one point, and is credited with this definition of sustainable development, which is to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, that is specifically associated with sustainable development. And when it was first coined, that definition tended to be used with regard to economies that didn't look very much like those that we enjoy in the West. However, over time, there's been a development, I suppose, of how that definition is seen. And you can see across the screen there 17 icons relating to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which seek to define what society could look like if we were, as it were, to get it right. And you can hopefully read the titles across each of those. And the first of the audience questions, really, if you could put the poll up, please. The first of the audience questions is to get you to try to define what you think is most important within the concept of sustainability. So if the poll is on the screen, you've got 10 options there. They're in a random or, well, alphabetical, but that doesn't mean that they're in any kind of order of prevalence. So if you could choose the two which you think best describe to what to you understand by the concept of sustainability. So hopefully you can recognize some of your responses in there. At the word environment coming out as a clear winner, followed by the word responsible. Now, interestingly, when you couch this kind of question in a way which is a bit less constrained, there's a bit more free form, and you ask people for 3 words which sum up to them the concept of sustainability, clearly you get a whole load of different types of words in there, but you can generally bundle them together into 4 categories. Environmental words, environment being an obvious example of that. Resilience words, so words which imply an ability to survive over the long term, so words like resilient or longevity, things like that. You get social words, words like community or fairness, and then you get a very, very small proportion of words which creep in, which are economic in nature. But what you can see there with environment coming out top is fairly representative of when you ask groups of people, but not always, and it depends very much on the individuals who are asked the question and how they feel. I've conducted polls of that nature just 4 weeks apart a couple of years ago. One came out overwhelmingly environmentally driven, another came out overwhelmingly socially driven. Nothing had changed in those 4 weeks particularly, so it just reflected those individuals. And as an organization within the world of food science and technology, and those of you who are members or potential members working for companies in the agri-food sector, how your employers and how you as individuals respond to the concept of sustainability is quite important from the perspective of stakeholders. So if we could have the next slide, please. This on the right-hand side was an analysis done on the Sustainable Development Goals and how the UK performs against them. Underneath those 17 goals that we saw on the previous slide are 169 individual targets. One of them that has involved us in IFST recently is target 12.3, which doesn't sit under zero hunger. It sits underneath responsible consumption and production. That is halving food waste by 2030. Now, across those 169 targets, this organization took a look at how the UK was performing, and you can see the stats there on the screen. Around 1 in 4 of those 169 targets, the performance was good. More than half it was below par, and around 1 in 6 it was poor. Now, the UK, of course, is one of the world's richest countries, not doing a particularly brilliant job in terms of measuring up to the requirements of the Sustainable Development Goals. And on the left-hand side, just a list of a number of areas how the SDGs and the concept of sustainability. And as regards you as an audience, you picked environment and responsible as your key words. So resource efficiency in terms of utilities and materials, emissions and carbon. Some of you may be involved with streamlined energy and carbon reporting and other reporting regimes. Food waste, big deal. The IFST has recently run, is continuing to run a series of webinars on that topic. Packaging is where probably most people have the greatest engagement, single-use plastics being the cause célèbre for the last couple of years since the Blue Planet 2 program. Consumer demand and consumer sentiment is a significant issue, and how people make their decisions. I've conducted some research work with business school students in the past, looking at how people get the information that they use to make the decisions that they make. TV is still surprisingly significant there. Then system shocks, we're in the middle of one at the moment. How does the system respond to disruptions? And we will all have seen the concern over plastics shrinking away over the last 12 months. People are wearing gloves and masks and other sorts of PPE, and single-use plastic has turned out to be quite good as a barrier material. Who knew? At protecting food products from the risk of contamination. And then finally, the whole concept of sustainable diets, not just the sustainability of the materials used in food production, but also the health and well-being implications of the diets that people follow. So next animation, please. So we have the next audience poll coming up, where this is at the moment, what you see there is the responsibility of the government managing the SDGs and how the UK manages it. But in this poll, we're going to ask you where you think primarily responsibility for making the UK, let's say, society sustainable, primarily sits in which of those four bodies. And again, we have around 30 seconds for you to think about this, hopefully an easier thing to think about, 1 out of 4 rather than 2 out of 10. So there you go. So that's interesting. You are profoundly unrepresentative of when I've conducted this before. Typically, business comes ahead of private citizens, and in fact, depends to a degree on where you sit in the age profile. Generally speaking, younger people think governments have more responsibility. Older people tend to expect less of government, and I'll leave you to decide for yourselves why you think that might be. Business typically is the area where respondents to this type of question put the most responsibility, although I do tend to split it amongst the four rather than force people to choose one of the four. Civil society almost always comes out bottom. They have a policing role, they don't have a responsibility role. Actually, private citizens tend to come out third of the fourth generally, and particularly for younger people, there's quite a significant intention action gap. So on to the final slide, please. So how do we engage with within the IFST? What does the steering group do? Well, we do those things you can see listed there on the left-hand side. Touches on some of what John has already spoken about in terms of what the IFST team do. Policy review. We try to look at the future big issues. We try to reflect current hot topics that come from amongst members, how market sentiment or consumer sentiment is reflected, what interests members, and that of course is both as private citizens and as employees of their employers. Trying to help people find trusted resources, either through creating them in terms of new research at the bottom, or signposting to existing research. And a few examples you can see on the screen there, some of the things that we've touched upon recently, going in a broadly clockwise direction from the bar chart. That firstly looks at what drives consumer engagement, a piece of research that was conducted or published only a few weeks ago. Next one round, the Committee on Climate Change 6th Carbon Budget. We're online to miss the 4th and 5th within the UK. This is all part of net zero by 2050. You've then got a piece of work there looking at biodiversity and how that is impacted by, I mean, the agri-food system globally is the largest single impactor on the health of natural ecosystems. Next one round, science-based initiative, science-based targets, again, around net zero and how organizations are going to reach there. Sainsbury's a few weeks ago published some targets looking upstream and downstream. Next one, around the World Economic Forum, they publish an annual risk view. 4 out of the top 5 risks in terms of likelihood in this past year were environmental. The other was the pandemic, so diseases, which is societal. The previous year, all 5 of the top 5 were environmental. So it's drifted over the last 15 years that report's been published from primarily what you would think of as conventional economic risk through to primarily environmental risk. And then finally, specifically from the co-op, although other organizations do this, a piece of work looking at how ethical consumption has changed throughout the pandemic. So a few examples there of some of the sustainability areas that were reflected in the first audience poll. Hopefully we can encourage more of you to get engaged with the IFST more generally, but those of you who are members, your engagement in sustainability is important to the Institute and also, of course, societally more generally. So hopefully that gives you a bit of flavor as to how and why we engage with sustainability. That's my 10 minutes more than over, and I shall hand you on to the next speaker, and thank you for your time.